Return of Magic. An Atlantis Outcasts prequel, written by G.K. Lund. Chapter 1. For 6 years I had been safe. For 6 years I had lived with equal-minded people, minding our own business, which was in everyone's best interest. But now, judging by the enormous crowd of furious Lanteans below, we were hated, reviled, not thanked, and soon to be cast out. The wind tore at my clothes so high up. I stood atop the stepped pyramid, our last bastion it seemed now. The giant structure rose up in the middle of the city like a looming mountain, demanding attention from everywhere. Impossible not to notice. It was the political power seat from where the city was governed. Atlantis itself spread out before me in a miasma of buildings, wooden and stone, old Greek-styled terraced boxes, to modern earthside houses, to tents out on the outskirts. So many people had come here over the millennia since the city had settled here, nestled in a canyon. The openings to the vast mineral mines in the canyon walls looked like small dots from where I stood. Atop the walls were the magnificent aqueducts, which brought water to the desert city, a city which had famously once been an island somewhere earthside. The noise was deafening. The buildings and structures that stretched out as far as the eye could see were stagnant. The true city, its citizens, were not. They had gathered outside the gates, held there by the barrier of the barred fence. There were no looming stone walls, drawbridges, and moats, keeping people at bay outside the pyramid. Only something that puzzled me a great deal. Today, more than ever. The Lanteans had come out in force, marching against the pyramid, demanding our surrender. Surrender? It was unfathomable. We were leading this city. Illustrious Guide was. We were doing so much good. And here, what seemed like hundreds of thousands screamed for our heads. Atlantis was a city of over 1 million Lanteans. Had they all come out to overthrow us? There were too many of them for the chance they shouted to be coherent or even organized. They started and stopped all around the pyramid, resulting in a cacophony of blaring noise. It was almost too much. It made it hard to think, but I couldn't leave my spot on the terrace so high above. I was being watched. And not merely as a spectator from up on high by the angered mobs below. I was dressed in red like we all were. Easy to spot, even from that distance. They looked like waves of impending doom, moving outside the gate. The open parade ground between the gargantuan stepped pyramid a wasteland, waiting for the trampling stampede. A high control group. That's what they called us. I'd heard it on the radio when we'd sneaked to listen to the non-sanctioned channels. It was always exciting to rebel a little against the leaders, those older than us. We'd laughed it off. Sometimes people shouted it after us in the streets, that we were in a cult. Only the stuffy know-it-alls in the dry political broadcasts used the term high control group. We knew better, and I felt some sadness for the people screaming for our end down there. They didn't know. How could they? They'd never taken the time to listen to Illustrious Guide. If only they'd listened. But here we were. The Red Kin, not a high control group, I was free to do what I wanted, was in charge of Atlantis. We had been for 6 years. Things had gotten better. Illustrious Guide had shown us this. And yet, people demanded our heads. All because of something that wasn't even our fault. The wind, though pleasantly cool in the warm climate, whipped against me, and I had to brace myself a little not to be pushed against the nearest wall, a short wall for shade when someone had the time to sit out here and enjoy the view. I huffed at the thought. If one had the time for that, then one had time for more work. A chant rose down there, more organized than the others, short and to the point, shouted with such volume and hatred even I could discern the words, "You killed them!" But we hadn't. Illustrious Guide had done his duty and sent armed kin to eradicate the vampires that were causing trouble. It wasn't their fault that an unfortunate accident had befallen those children who were nearby. It was just a coincidence. It wasn't the kin, but a gas leak that had killed the boys. The beloved 10, as they'd been dubbed in the media. After that, illustrious guide had instructed us to not read the papers or listen to the radio without someone there to help us understand in case questions arose. It was the best way to avoid confusion. But why would no one listen to us? The vampires had been stopped. We'd protected them. We had done... A shimmer in the sky alerted me, the only warning I got before a projectile came soaring right toward me. If I had thought about it, and not reacted on instinct, it would have hit me square in the chest. I twisted sideways, and the long wooden spear flew past me and struck the wall, right next to the door behind me. I gasped in shock. My heart beat faster, and the crowd's noise came muffled in my ears while I stared at the lethal weapon that fell to the floor with a clanking noise, the metal tip broken off in the collision with the wall. Cheers rose from below. I stared down at them in disbelief. If that thing had hit me, it would have pierced through me. And they were cheering? I wanted to run inside, took a step toward the door. Then I remembered myself and forced myself to face the crowds again. I was being watched. My breathing came faster, my focus solely on the spot where the spear had caused a disturbance in the air. That would be my only warning. The sky looked a magnificent blue, bluer than it truly was. The city was seen through a sheen of reddish-brown. The shield that kept the angered mob at bay amplified the colors somewhat. Now and then I saw the same kind of shimmering disturbances in it, down in the reddish level where the odd magic wielder dared to show their faces publicly and try to attack the shield. Only simple projectiles like arrows and spears hurled with machinery could break through, but not people, and certainly not magic. I sneered at the thought. Another shimmer alerted me to a second attack. This time I stepped sideways, albeit quickly, and watched the long projectile whiz past me. It hit the wall at great force and speed, the metal tip burrowing into the mortar between 2 blocks of stone. I forced myself to ignore the still-moving shaft and faced forward again. I was being watched. Just a few more minutes. That would suffice. Surely. No more spears came my way in those minutes, but they ticked by so slowly. Finally, when I deemed my return inside would be approved, I stepped back tentatively, and a tiny, treacherous thought pushed itself forward in my mind. I glanced one last time at the magical shield, which was the only barrier between us and them. As long as it held, we were safe. But if the Red Kin worked tirelessly to destroy and remove all magic, a most unjust and cruel force, from the Atlantis realm, then why did we use it ourselves? Chapter 2. "Well?" Ambrose said the moment I stepped back inside the pyramid. The warm, windless air and the sudden muffled sound of the crowds from outside were a relief. I had no time to consider those things, though. "The shield is holding," I told him. Ambrose, about my height but a man in his early 60s, stood stock still, his back straight like he was wont to. His once healthy olive skin, under short gray curls, was a sickly pale now. I wondered if he'd been outside the last month. Like me, he wore nothing but red clothes, our uniform, so to speak. One was free to wear whatever one wanted, but joining together like this marked us as a cohesive unit. Ambrose wore a red shirt and trousers, whereas I wore a short tunic over my pants and ankle boots, all of it in various shades of red. Unlike him, my hair fit the uniform color code, too. It was a dark auburn, and I preferred to gather it in a chignon high on my head to avoid looking like a block of red. It was also comfortable. "What about the crowd?" Ambrose asked me. He had a notebook in his hand, but didn't seem to see the point in writing this down. Who would forget the broad strokes of the entire city at the gates? "They will storm in here if given the chance. They are screaming for our heads." Ambrose sighed, and for a moment the hushed voices of everyone behind him Going about their day was all I could hear. How much longer would I hear these normal sounds? "I will inform illustrious guide," Ambrose finally said, though he didn't seem like he relished being this messenger. I hadn't seen our leader in a few days, which was odd, so I had no idea what kind of mood he was in. The order for me to go out on the terrace had come from him, though, so he was aware of the chaos out there. "Then we must," Ambrose began and shook his head, looking like he couldn't believe what he was about to say. "Put our faith in the shield." Maybe the crowd will calm down if time wears them down. He swallowed hard, remembered himself, and then gave me a curt nod before he turned on his heel and went away to inform illustrious guide of our situation. "Bad news and more bad news, isn't it, Emery?" a woman murmured near my shoulder. I stepped sideways, startled by her silent approach. "Daria, you surprised me." I shook my head and eyed her. "May you find inner strength and a free spirit of mind today," I greeted her. "Oh, inner strength and free spirit," she said, giving me the short version while waving it all off like it was inconsequential. Daria was a few years older than my 24 years. In her late 20s, I thought, but I had never asked. She wasn't exactly a close friend. The kin were plentiful, and though the members knew of most of each other, not everyone knew each other. Daria, with her wavy, golden brown hair, was a head shorter than me. She also sported a completely different style than I did clothing-wise. Having lived 14 years Earthside before coming to Atlantis with my parents, I tended toward modern Earthside styles. Daria looked like she came from the same realm only a century or so earlier, with her long skirt and tight buttoned-up blouse, all red, naturally. Except for the color choice, this was common all over Atlantis, which was a melting pot of people and creatures from many realms and cultures. "Can I help you with something?" I asked her, slightly unnerved by the smile on her face. She shrugged. "Nice reflexes out there." I frowned. "You saw?" I thought Ambrose had been the only one watching, not the only one knowing. Of course not, but we kin were good at pretending to stay back and keep our noses out of things. Definitely. Ambrose was busy watching too. Never saw me. He reacted slowly when those spears came. Not like you. Didn't know you had it in you. She snorted. "I always thought those were for show," she added and indicated the daggers strapped to my left hip and thigh. Twin daggers made entirely from an unknown metal alloy, hilts and all. "These daggers were a gift from illustrious guide. They are for whatever he deems necessary," I told her, raising my chin defiantly. "Yes, we must all do as he says, even his little pet." "What?" "You do know why he sent you out there, right?" I glanced back at the door. "What do you mean?" "He sent you out there to prove we are all expendable." "Of course we are." Daria smiled sadly and shook her head. "You're not part of the fire circle. I'll grant you that, but you are right outside it, protected by him for some reason. I mean, I've heard you haven't even had to sleep with him. How did you manage that?" I took a step back, shocked at her blunt words. Not the mention of sex. The kin didn't preach that kind of morality, but at her all-too-candid words about illustrious guide, and the fact that rumors were circulating about me. "I have work to do," I told her, and stepped farther into the Atlas halls. They were a series of interconnected open-floor planned rooms where most of the red kin were now gathered. Usually, we weren't this many in here at the same time, but the mobs out in the city had made many seek safety here. Skirmishes had broken out right outside the gates last night when the mobs had truly begun gathering, and many kin had been wounded on their way in. Some civilians had also ended up here, the mobs not spotting the difference. Normally they wouldn't be kept this high up, but illustrious guide had decided to empty the lower levels of the pyramid. Only armed kin members patrolled those areas now. I walked between the other kin and found a basket with buns on the food table. Someone had baked. We still had the ingredients to do so. I honestly can't believe the priorities of some of the people here, Daria said, a snort of derision at the sight of the food I had chosen to share. By illustrious guide's estimation, we have 2 weeks before we need to start rationing, I told her, annoyed that she'd followed me. Right. Those are Jeremy's estimations, not Kerwin's. He can't do math unless 1 and 0 come together, she said, and made a crude gesture to match her analogy. And we do not have 1 day even. I drew back, then I stepped closer and spoke with hushed, rapid words. You shouldn't use his name. Why not? Daria slurred. I had to sleep with him. Doesn't that usually mean people are on a first-name basis? This close, I now smelled what I hadn't before. Are you drunk? Daria blew air between her tightly pressed lips. No, she said, squinting at me. Maybe a little. How did you even get hold of any alcohol? We didn't drink. Alcohol prohibited clear minds. We couldn't do our work properly. There was no alcohol in the pyramid. One had to leave the premises for that, and then hope no one saw you in the wrong tavern or bar and tell on you. Oh, Emery, have you ever been to the lower levels? You'd be amazed at all the treasures in this place. It's ancient. Humph, I said, and swung past her. I don't have time for gossip. There is work to do. Of course there is. There always is. I ignored her and began my rounds, seeking out the visibly injured people first, offering them the treats now that they had all been given proper dinners. There were more civilians than I expected. I'd been sent outside to assess the crowds when food had been served and hadn't helped out then. Now I saw people with bruises and cuts, tired eyes and scared faces. There were even children among them. Hi there, I said, and knelt in front of a boy who sat a little to the side of the nearest people. He was almost pushing himself into a corner near the door to an adjoining room. What's your name? The boy was around 10 years, no more, with black curls, pale skin, and big blue eyes. He avoided my gaze for several seconds before daring to look at me. The poor thing had a black eye. I'm Emery, I offered. Rye, he finally said. Nice to meet you, Rye. Want one? I proffered the basket with the freshly baked wheat goodies. Where are your parents? I added when he hesitantly took one. Lost them, he said, glancing around like he was afraid someone would hear him, while simultaneously probably needing to tell someone. Yesterday. The people came. There were so many. My dad fell. He stopped talking and withdrew into himself. I stared down at the buns, feeling like an idiot. How pointless. His parents might very well have been trampled by the mob last night. It was a miracle the boy had ended up in the group that had made it inside. I'm sure those buns will make it better, Daria remarked, her voice dry. I pressed my lips together in anger and flew up, grabbed her arm, and made her come with me to a fairly empty space by the wall in the next room. What's the matter with you? I hissed. And why are you on my back all of a sudden? I simply noticed how screwed we are if Kerwin's sending you out there. I shook my head. Illustrious guide would never put me or any of us in harm's way. Not knowingly. She was messing with me. Anyway, that's another sign we are done here. We are not. Daria's condescending look was more than enough, but she added an, Emery, come on. Listen, I said, glancing around in case anyone was close enough to overhear. But the kin members were going about their chores or gossiping among themselves. You can't say things like this. Stop it. Why? I have said nothing wrong. Yes, you have, I insisted. Daria made a grimace of faux surprise. But we are not a high control group, she chanted in an innocent tone of voice. We are free to do as we want. I am free to share my views on our leader and will surely not be thrown out for proving what we always tell outsiders. I stopped myself. What? Are you going to deny how free we are to speak our minds? I narrowed my eyes and hitched the basket up to my elbow before I left her again. This time I made sure to walk far away, discarding the basket where I found it and hurrying back the way I'd come. I should tell on her. I really should, I mumbled under my breath, then stopped by the doors that led out to the terrace. I inched closer and peered out the small glass window embedded there. It was harder to see the crowd from here, but I saw a little. I was getting used to the background noise of their screams of anger now. If I told on Daria now when she was this careless and inebriated, she might get herself thrown out fast. They'd tear her to shreds down there. I glanced back into the Atlas halls. So many people dressed in red. A low murmur of suppressed fear that barely sounded above the now ever-present noise from outside. They were all afraid. Their stiff and controlled movements couldn't hide it. Was Daria right? Would we be overtaken? I looked at them as they went about their business. These were my friends, my kindred spirits. They would be torn to shreds, too. I sighed. We had chosen to be here, though. The civilians had not. Yet they would be dealt with harshly, too. The mob would attack them as well, probably thinking they were kin trying to change their colors. My eyes went back to the boy, Rye. At least I could prove Daria wrong on one account. Illustrious Guide wouldn't risk a boy's life. It wasn't Rye's fault he'd ended up in here, in the chaos that now ruled out in the city. Daria sidled back into the room the boy was in, and I got wind in my sails then, hurrying away down a back corridor. I was going to prove her wrong. Of course, Illustrious Guide cared about us, protected us. I was going to prove it to her before she made a fool of herself. She was not right about this. Chapter 3. I hurried down several corridors until I reached the back stairs, as far as one could have actual back stairs in a building that was effectively a symmetric square seen from above. The interiors were divided into sections and zones, though, so the back stairs, or servants' stairs, were the most efficient. From there I went up a floor to the so-called royal apartments. Usually the elected regent of Atlantis would use these rooms during their term. No royals resided here now, though. We had seen to that. This was where Illustrious Guide lived now. It was also where he usually gathered his closest advisors, a great honor around him. They were the Fire Circle, as Daria had correctly called them. The inner circle of the Red Kin. People outside the kin thought the name was a play on our red-colored clothes, but they were partly wrong. We were all to fight the fire of magical infestation which had ruled Atlantis for thousands of years. It did nothing but break the people without it. There was no justice and fairness in that. We were the fire to end the injustice, and the red symbolized our burning desire to do so. May you find inner strength and a free spirit of mind today, I greeted Flossie, Illustrious Guide's principal secretary, when I entered our cramped little office. I hadn't seen her for hours, so I deemed the greeting necessary. Emery? She turned in her chair, eyes red. Had she been crying? Is it true? What? Are they here to kill us? I walked over to my tiny and sparsely equipped desk to sit down. The muffled noise from the crowds outside could be heard even here in the center of the royal floor. Don't worry, the shield protects us. My deflection wasn't good enough. They are here to kill us, then. I can't believe this is happening. She grabbed a paper tissue from a box on her desk and dabbed it against her eyes to preserve her makeup. Flossie was my third boss in as many years, and pretty to boot with her raven black hair and pale skin. I liked her, though, certainly more than the last one, and secretly hoped Illustrious Guide wouldn't woo her into his bed. At that point, it was always only a matter of time before he tired of them and a new secretary arrived. I was their assistant and had been since the age of 14 when Illustrious Guide had given me the job, stating he saw great things in me. My job was to do the more menial tasks, or everything in those periods between new bosses. Nothing is happening, I told her. We will be fine. Illustrious Guide knows what he's doing. Flossie didn't get to answer me. The door to Illustrious Guide's chambers opened and she straightened up, flattening her hands on her pencil skirt and brushing them toward her knees. Black was the only true accent color we were allowed to use, but with that skirt, she was allowed to use a lot of it. The favorites always were. It wasn't Illustrious Guide who came out, though, passing through our office. Clemens, a handsome guy in his 30s, and also an occasional favorite of our leader, didn't stop to chat. Yeah, Illustrious Guide mostly preferred women, but didn't really discriminate in that regard. Clemens, though, a member of the Fire Circle, looked pissed off. I was about to ask Flossie since I hadn't been here since yesterday, but the door opened again. This time Jeremy, a middle-aged man with a receding hairline, came walking out. He only shook his head and mumbled something to himself before vanishing out into the corridors. "What's going on?" I asked. "It's been like this for hours," she said. "They're arguing." "What? Why?" "Haven't you seen the mob outside the pyramid? The rumors were Illustrious Guide sent you, of all people, out to verify everything." I took some random papers from my desk and shuffled them around without purpose. The comment was uncomfortable. I had long suspected he had a plan of sorts for me. I was nothing special, but the daggers I always wore hadn't only been a gift when I first arrived in Atlantis and joined the kin. I shuddered, like I often did at the memory of the ritual that had been performed on me then. It had involved a blood witch, much pain, and the daggers being mentally tied to me as a result. It was best not to think about the magic that had been used then. And since Illustrious Guide had used such a measure, it had to be important, especially since the daggers repelled magic. But the comments from both Flossie and Daria today unnerved me more than usual. Something about the fact that he had sent me? What did that mean? Was Daria right? Was it to prove to us all that everyone was expendable? Emery? What? I straightened up and looked at Flossie. I hadn't paid attention to her. I asked what you're doing here. I thought you were downstairs doing the work. Ah, yes, the work. It never seemed to end, and if it did end, we would spend that idle time finding other work to do, or run up and down the exterior stairs of the pyramid. That was certain to make you find a cupboard to scrub. I was, but I need to talk to Illustrious Guide. Not now, he is busy. I understand that, but there are innocent people in the Atlas halls. They came in here by mistake, and it doesn't matter, Em. None of us will be here that long. Don't say that. Stop it. It's clear as day. They will destroy us this time. She was about to say more, but stopped herself before she burst into tears, placing both hands over the lower half of her face. There had been the odd protest out there before, but they had always disappeared quick enough. There had never been anything like today. I'm sorry, Flossie. I didn't mean to upset you, I said, and got up. I'll just go back downstairs and help. She nodded without a word, hands still in front of her face, probably waiting for me to be out the door before she allowed herself to cry. I wasn't going back down again, though. For once, I was going to shun my work. Not that I hadn't done it before when I was younger. The young kin members always tried to have fun. Today wasn't a fun day at any rate, but I still needed to do something. I followed familiar corridors. The benefit of having worked on this floor for 10 years was that I knew every nook and cranny, every corridor and hidden spaces. The pyramid was thousands of years old and had been modified over that time. As I walked, I was surrounded by blocks of stone. It was what the enormous structure had been built from, and every floor stood on thick stone walls and massive columns that had been carved from the same kinds of walls to allow for more space as time went on. May you find inner strength and a free spirit of mind today, Euphemia, one of the armed kin said when I passed her in a narrow corridor. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a tight ponytail, and she wore clothes similar to mine, but a red t-shirt and an unbuttoned and faded flannel shirt over it. She'd lived Earthside a few years before coming here too. "You too," I said, hurrying past the woman with the sword. I had no time to waste. "Are you okay there, Emery?" she asked, halting me with her stern voice. Crap. I hadn't greeted her correctly. I stopped and faced her. "Yes, I'm okay. I heard you went outside today." Wow. Rumors traveled fast. "Uh-huh. I've been out there too," Euphemia ventured. This wasn't a surprise. The armed kin had not been told to stay inside like the rest of us. But because of mundane projectiles being able to pass through the shield, I guessed they were inside most of the time too. What was a surprise was the sad frown on Euphemia's face. It disappeared quickly enough when she remembered herself. I was not one of her group. "Things will calm down," she said, sounding like she was trying to convince us both. For sure," I mumbled, forcing a smile and using the awkward moment to escape down the corridor, and then into the next one, and so on. I hoped she was right. Things had never looked this bad before. 3 minutes later, I reached my goal, a utility closet deep inside this level. It was a tiny room, really, with all kinds of equipment and junk stored in it. But at the floor, hidden behind bags containing ropes, was a metal grate of wrought iron of waves rolling over each other. The thing about the pyramid was that it was so massive, air ducts had been created from the get-go to lead air in and vent moisture out. Unlike Earthside movies, though, these air ducts were also made from stone, like everything here was. There were no flimsy and huge metal pipes that went exactly where you wanted them to for a perfect vantage point. Nor were the air ducts particularly wide, but I just managed to squeeze through. It was a tight fit and had been easier when I was 14. Still, it got me where I needed to go, closer to Illustrious Guide's inner sanctum. The royal apartments were private and secluded, but also reachable by servants in so many ways. But then, being royal had never been about privacy. The people who had wanted the job of regent in Atlantis had always had to exchange privacy for power, and many gladly did. Maybe I could even sneak inside when there. If Illustrious Guide was a little drunk, he might forget to ask how I got in. I reached the other identical grate within 5 minutes. That was the easy part. It would take more than twice that to crawl backward the way I had come. "All cowards," a familiar, yet angered voice floated to me. "Your lack of faith astounds me!" It was Illustrious Guide. I'd heard him angry before, but these clipped and shouted words sounded like something entirely different. Careful not to make even the faintest of sounds, I moved closer and settled next to the grate so I could see. Not that the wrought iron waves allowed for much of a view. Also, the grate was at floor level, under a table. What I saw had to be Illustrious Guide seated farther inside the room. It was hard to discern facial features and other details through the swirly metal, but I recognized his voice. I could see other people moving about, but with all the red garments it was hard to visually distinguish one from the other. Someone was tuning the radio in there, the crackling and static noises interfering somewhat with my ease at hearing the others talk. "This is not about faith, but reality," a man said. "Our reality has always been exactly what is in front of us, nothing more and nothing less. Certainly not the infestations of magical acts. There is nothing but a magical shield between them and us," another man pointed out. I was shocked at his interrupting Illustrious Guide, even more so because I recognized that voice too. It was my father. I had never heard him oppose our leader before, neither secretly nor openly. "Sometimes we must fight fire with fire," Illustrious Guide said, the anger thinly veiled in his voice. "This is not the first time we've had to resort to such measures." "What?" "You all know this," he added. I shook my head. They had used magic? A lot of it? What was this? It didn't sound like our leader and the fire circle at all. They abhorred magic. It was an unfair advantage used to subjugate those without it. A society of the great standing of Atlantis should be based on that of the magicless Earth. That was how you got society to move in the right direction. We do. We all understand the necessities of using magic to end magic, and we did too, but now the tides have turned, a woman said. Jamie, I thought. One of my mother's dear friends. Don't you dare tell me the tides have turned, illustrious guide roared at them. I could see his unclear frame sitting up in the soft chair. Have I not brought you here to the seat of power? Have not everything I told you come to fruition? We rule this city. I rule it. A thumping noise sounded, and I thought it looked like he thumped his chest for emphasis. And you dare speak against me? Illustrious guide wasn't the only one who was shocked. I was too. What was happening here? They weren't merely arguing. They were openly disagreeing with illustrious guide. No one did that, ever. And they talked about using magic themselves? What was this? Tomorrow there will be no speaking against anyone. They will win, Jamie insisted. Normally, illustrious guide's harsh words would send anyone into a crouch of obedient silence, but not now. I couldn't believe what she was saying. What they all seemed to imply in their united disagreement with him. We would lose. How could that be? Illustrious guide had told us this was nothing to worry about, to stay indoors and do our work, that he would handle it for us. I should have you proscribed for this, illustrious guide said, his voice lowered now, cold and angry. It doesn't matter anymore, Jamie said. I had never heard anyone so unafraid when faced with banishment from the kin. Her entire life was at stake. What was there to live for outside the kin? I couldn't fathom it. Had never wished to explore it. Those were the kinds of thoughts I always forced aside when faced with them. Like downstairs when Daria had pushed her uncomfortable points at me. She's right, another man I couldn't see said. His voice drifted to me from somewhere to the right. Tomorrow we are all ruined, one way or another. What matters now is how we act during these last hours we have. What we do? Illustrious guide sputtered. Listen, I found it, a woman broke in. My mother. She was the one who'd been tuning the radio. Now, the voices from out in the city broke through the room when she turned up the volume. Outside the pyramid, an unfamiliar voice drifted to them. And me. It is unprecedented, not seen in centuries. I have with me here Matteo Gregar, former security officer for the Foreign Affairs branch under King Echelon's reign. Welcome to the debate here at LBC. In surprise, I drew in too much dust in my mouth. Lantian Broadcasting? We were not allowed to listen to that channel. Ever. Not even under supervision. I'd heard Illustrious Guide had even managed to stop their broadcasts, but here they were, so maybe not. Why were the Fire Circle listening to this? They knew better. I had to swallow down the dry dust to avoid coughing it out and be discovered. Thank you. The voice of Matteo Gregar sounded assured and confident, even in just those two words. Yes. We have not seen such an uproar since the end of the Roman Empire Earthside, when the clans who are now the royal families fled here. There was much unrest then, too, and a power vacuum waiting to be filled. What? Illustrious Guide blurted, but no one paid him any heed. They were all engrossed in the broadcast. So was I. I'd never heard something like this before. Not even when young kin listened to illegal channels did they listen to LBC. And what were the causes then? Something as explosive as the beloved 10. I frowned. The beloved 10? This again? That had not been the fault of the kin. Surely they saw that. The causes then, like now, were many and complex. But yes, The unfortunate events that led to the deaths of these boys are now what appears to be a catalyst. A catalyst for ending a regime? Regime? I stared blindly at the grate. The 10 boys out playing that day were caught in the crossfire of the Red Kin and their already late response to these rogue vampires. The silver bomb should never have been detonated outside the vampire lair, and certainly not so close to a playground. Their so-called illustrious guide. Lofty title, isn't it? Oh yes, I agree. But that is the way in these high-control groups. But as I was saying, he should never have allowed the disbanding and downright harassment of the Atlantis hunters. They would have handled the vampires sooner. The truth is, those vampires would likely never have become a problem in the first place if the hunters had been here to maintain control the whole time. Those were lies. I clenched my fists. Nothing but lies. The hunters, the halfway sanctioned government group that hunted down and slayed rogue creatures such as vampires and werewolves, were often some magical creatures themselves or used magic in their endeavors. I had no doubt the kin had done what they could to end this vile vamp infestation, and to imply that the Red Kin had been so reckless as to risk civilians in the streets. Those boys had tragically died because of a gas leak that happened nearby, and coincidentally at the same time as the kin did rid Atlantis of those vamps. The blatant lies. I should not listen to this filth. Years of training had taught me that. Illustrious Guide had always said so. So had the lower-level leaders, even my parents. And they were right to instill this in us. This was meant to cause confusion. They lied and didn't care about us. They wanted to sow doubts in our hearts and minds. Well, I would not let them. I trusted Illustrious Guide, not some radio host and a member of a government that hadn't served their people properly. I could certainly think for myself, and this was not even worth thinking about. Yet when I began shimmying back a little, Illustrious Guide roared for the radio to be turned off, and his next words shattered my world. Chapter 4. "Turn it off, I said!" Illustrious Guide yelled, his voice erratic with anger. The radio broadcast was cut off, my mother's doing most likely since she had found it in the first place. Those ungrateful mongrels. May the old gods piss on their tongues, blaming us for those deaths. Their parents should not have let them outside. They are to blame. We killed the vampires. What more do they want? But, sir, collateral damage is to be expected. This is our war against magic. But, sir, a man, Broussard, said, they were children. I don't care if they were fairies. They were in the way. Not our fault. Not my fault. I stared in disbelief through the wrought iron in front of me, seeing them all as red blobs moving about the man I'd thought could fix everything. It was true? The lies? No, not lies. It was all true. The armed kin out that day had lost control of the vamps and detonated the silver bomb in the street without regard for the nearby children. They were dead because of the Red Kin, not some accident. How could I have been so stupid to believe that? A gas explosion. Few people in Atlantis used gas. Electricity was more common. And Illustrious Guide, the man who said he would protect not only us but the entire city, he disregarded these children? Like they were nothing? No wonder the whole city wanted our heads. I felt my eyes burning while I lay there in the cramped air duct, listening to his continued rambling and shouting. He couldn't see why people were rebelling out there. I felt like crying, but no tears came. I was too numb to react to anything. Illustrious Guide had said they'd made up the story to harm us, to rile up the citizens in an attack against us. But there he sat, leaning back in his comfortable chair, admitting that what they said on a channel we were forbidden to listen to because of their continued lies was true. Absolutely true. What else had he lied about? My mind was allowing all the treacherous thoughts it hadn't before, all the inconsistencies and double standards that had to be pushed aside to survive in here. Knowledge truly was a slippery slope. Illustrious Guide was right about that at least.
"This isn't about the beloved 10 anymore,"
Broussard said, the desperation in his voice drawing me back.
"He's right,"
Ambrose chimed in. I couldn't see where in the room he was.
"It's about who among ourselves can be saved now." "No one,"
Illustrious Guide began, but was cut off by Broussard.
"The children, sir. We should send them out. Many of our sisters and brothers have children inside the pyramid. The little ones, at least, should be allowed to leave."
"No one leaves!" Illustrious Guide snapped, apparently at a point where chastising people for talking over him was futile. The fire circle seemed less afraid now. Something worse awaited outside, of course.
"Sir,"
Jamie insisted.
"they are children."
"The Lantians will surely murder them the second they step outside. They are evil, magic-wielding miscreants. You expect kindness from them?" I didn't. I never had. But maybe. If Illustrious Guide had lied about something so important as the beloved 10, might he have lied about the Lantians too? I knew only one person outside the Red Kin, and she was a good friend. Had Illustrious Guide lied about everything? I ran my hands into my hair, threading my fingers under the chignon, pulling slightly to make it hurt, to numb myself against the confusion in my head.
"We can make a deal," one man in there said. "They will honor it. For the sake of the children, sir," Ambrose pleaded. "I beg you." "And you're good for nothing more," Illustrious Guide shouted back. "So is this it, then? You're all turning against me when things get a little difficult?" "No," my father said. "We have faith in you, sir. If you say we should remain here, all of us, then we will."
I gasped, but luckily, the people inside the solar were too preoccupied with the argument to notice the sound. Had my father truly said that? Was he willing to risk the children? My eyes didn't burn with the need to cry anymore. Instead, the numbness within kindled into something else, something I had always been good at suppressing. The small spark of anger grew and grew. If I was free to choose what to listen to and not, then I sure as hell would not listen to more of this. I'd heard enough. Careful not to make a sound, I eased myself backward, crawling slowly to get out from there. They had lied. All of them. They, in Illustrious Guide's inner circle, must have known all of this too. No one in that room had been surprised at the allegations from the radio broadcast. No one. And that included my parents. That realization was hard to take in. I was an adult now and had been almost 18 when the kin took power. But what if we'd ended up in the same situation when I was a girl? Would my father have said the same thing? Would he not have cared about my safety either? The fact that I had no good answer to that question was harrowing. I backed out of the narrow air duct and into the utility closet. It was a relief to stretch out, but I had no time for it. I hurried to put the grate back in its place and shoved the bags of rope in front of it. Then I stopped and stared at the hidden spy hole. What was the point? According to the fire circle, we barely had any time left. "Stop it!" I muttered to myself, and brushed all the dust off my clothes before I stepped back into the corridor outside. I navigated them blindly while new and uncomfortable thoughts churned on inside my head. What Illustrious Guide had decided was cruel, and for once, I felt an undeniable need to do something. But what? I couldn't single-handedly take all the children and escort them out. There were too many of them, and the armed kin would discover us before we got far. That would be the end of me, and the children would be moved back to start. I was about to punch a fist in the wall when a few kin members rounded a corner and saved the bones in my hand from excruciating pain. I wandered aimlessly after that, drifting back to the Atlas halls below where I at least wouldn't be alone. Or so I thought. Standing there, watching my fellow kin members go about their tasks amid worried faces and hushed whispers of worry was hard to experience. The muted cries from outside were an ever-present threat none of us could explain, and regarding explanations, Even if I attempted to recount what I'd just heard, no one would believe me. They'd say I'd lost it, or that someone from outside had gotten to me, influenced me with lies. I hadn't. I'd heard it from the lion's mouth, so to speak, and they would never believe me. I sighed and closed my eyes, wondering why the tears wouldn't come. When I opened them, I noticed the boy, Rye. He still sat pressed against the wall, afraid and confused. He must have heard so many horror stories about the Red Kin, and now he sat here among us. It had to be a living nightmare for the boy, especially with his parents lost or dead. He didn't even know which. For the first time in my life, I made a decision that went against the Kin's rules. No, this wasn't like sneaking out into the city or listening in on the leaders now and then. This time, without any doubt, I stepped forward, knowing that if I was caught, I could be thrown out forever. "Hi there, Rye," I said, and hunkered down next to the boy. "Remember me?"
"Emery,"
he said, not meeting my eyes.
"That's right. That's a bad-looking bruise you've got there. Shall we see if we can find something to ease the pain a little?"
Rye's brows creased, which made him wince due to the soreness. Then he nodded and took my proffered hand. "Come on, then," I said loudly for anyone close enough to hear. "Let's see if we can find some ice for your eye." I had no such intentions, of course. But if I couldn't help anyone in the Kin, I was sure going to help this kid before it was too late. I knew now, though it was hard to wrap my head around, that illustrious guide had lied. Maybe the people out there weren't so bad, but in case he hadn't lied about that, I was going to get at least this boy out. I had to do something right before it all went bad. "This isn't a kitchen," Rye commented after I'd led him down 3 floors and into a big, cluttered room. He had been expecting us to find a freezer with ice. "No, these are the Gothia chambers," I said, and flipped the switch by the door. The electric lights came on, illuminating the large room with its interconnected door leading to another chamber. The one we were in was filled with all kinds of magical artifacts, all confiscated from the magic wielders in the city. The doors in here had never been locked. There was no need. None of us had ever been interested in using these things. Most of us had thought it best to destroy them and had wondered why that hadn't happened. Now I knew, of course. The Fire Circle had said so themselves. They had lowered themselves to using magic to fight fire with fire. Why hadn't I seen that before? I should slap myself. "What are we doing here?" Rye asked. He walked into the room and seemed anything but surprised. How odd. There were books and potions and gems all around us. There were larger items, too, like furniture and things that looked like machines. "Well," I said and walked over to a stack of books on a dusty ottoman. I briefly wondered what that could do, but focused on the task at hand. My heart was beating fast when I reached for the purple book, stacked under some of the others. "I used to come here years ago with my friends, right after we moved in here." I stopped and glanced around. There wasn't so much stuff then. I shrugged and lifted the book. "But we used to hang out here, away from our parents. And these were the forbidden things, so naturally, we were drawn to it all." "You hate magic," Rye said. He was walking among the artifacts, his eyes on me too, though, on watch in case I turned out to be a Red Kin monster, no doubt. "We do," I admitted. "But today, I learned about some things that are worse." I leafed through the pages and then found the spell I was searching for. The spell to return to one's loved ones. Rye stopped next to a mirror that completely dwarfed him and turned to face me across all the magical knickknacks. "That won't work." "Don't say that, and wait. How do you know?" "I know you're trying to send me back to my parents, but that spell won't work." I frowned. I know I don't have any magic, or any knowledge on how to cast a spell, but there are tons of stuff in here that I'm sure can give the spell a little juice." "No," the kid said, looking somber and sounding assured. Weird.
Listen, Rye. You shouldn't be here, and I am so sorry that this happened to you. I only want to help you. I know.
He brushed a hand along the thick silver frame of the mirror, a tall and rectangular shape. Without the frame, it appeared somewhat unimposing and uninteresting.
How do you know? I can sense it,
was the matter-of-fact answer from a 10-year-old. I felt shivers run down my back. I had a strong feeling this wasn't only about his age. I'd seen magic in Atlantis before the kin took over, but wasn't used to being around magic wielders and didn't know what to expect.
Was that why you came with me down here?
He nodded.
I knew when you gave me the bun that you'd want to do the right thing.
Doesn't everyone?
Not your family, he said, and I knew he meant the red kin, not just my parents.
Was this kid some kind of seer? But how would he know about spells too then? Was he a mage? I understood so little of this. Then what do you suggest? I asked him, realizing that even though I had planned to save him, he was likely going to fix that problem himself.
This, he said, and indicated the mirror.
I put down the book and sidled closer.
It's a mirror. A gateway.
Not unlike the shimmer, Rye explained. Less potent. I blinked. What kind of kid talked like that? And the shimmer? I hadn't seen it in years. It was the gateway between realms, the veil that stretched between, allowing travelers to pass through. It was how I'd traveled to Atlantis 10 years ago. It can't send you to another realm? I asked.
No.
But it can send you out of here? Past the shield?
Yes.
Okay then. Show me what to do and I'll help you. The boy was about to say something but turned to face the door we'd entered. I did the same right when it opened and a woman walked inside. You traitor, she said to me, clearly having listened at the door long enough to hear something incriminating. Her light blue eyes were hard and unyielding in her justified anger. Chapter 5. Euphemia? I managed, feeling my face and neck heat up. I'd never been caught doing something so reckless and dangerous before. Something that was strictly forbidden. Using magic? I might as well leave the red kin now. You're helping a prisoner escape? And using magic to do so? She sounded outraged, and it wasn't lost on me that she advanced into the room. She didn't shout for help or run the other way. Her hand was on the hilt of her sword, too. I thought you were acting funny earlier, but this? She waved her free hand around, apparently at a loss for words to explain my behavior. It's not, I began, but stopped myself. It was exactly what she thought. Listen, the boy is innocent. They won't let him go. Then they have a good reason for it, Euphemia said. She barely looked at Rye, like he didn't matter unless illustrious guide said otherwise. We can talk about this, I tried, hands up, palms toward her to show my peaceful intent. You don't have to, do that, I finished when she drew her sword from its scabbard. Rye, I said, glancing over my shoulder. Run! The boy looked scared. He was likely sensing Euphemia's intent if he'd been able to sense mine, but he was exactly that, a boy. Scared and with some added punch. I didn't see what he did, but a flash of white-yellow light soared past me, straight for Euphemia. She cried out in surprise and twisted sideways, avoiding a full-on strike, but the bright orb of magic still hit her. It disappeared in a puff and she shouted in shocked pain. Then she turned her eyes on us. Rye, I said over my shoulder, without taking my eyes off her. Hide! I barely got the word out before she charged me, her sword raised to attack. For a second, I froze. I had no idea what to do, and the only reason I even reacted and got out of her way was the distance between us. Still, I felt the surge of the air when the blade passed me, Someone trained in the art of sword fighting would probably have swung around and parried her next move, but I was not one of those. I'd always wanted to, even begged in my teens, but I had never been allowed to join the armed kin. Illustrious Guide had been adamant that I remain close to him, so now, with an angered armed kin coming at me, I ran forward instead and grabbed the closest things I reached. I turned and hurled everything I could at her, and not a moment too late. She'd already recovered and turned toward me, chasing me down with her damn sword. She cursed and swore at the items that hit her, gemstones, bottles, books, and the like. I backed up, desperate for that blade not to slice into me. The only thing I had going for me was agility due to running up the pyramid stairs several times a week, and a desperate need to survive. "I can't believe you'd do this," Euphemia snarled after me. I might not have been allowed to practice with weapons, but I'd seen enough of the armed kin to know she knew what she was doing. But it was hard with all the clutter around and between us. We both struggled to keep our footing. "Illustrious Guide trusted you," she shouted when I fell back over a table with a crystal ball embedded into the center. The ball fell out and rolled along the floor. I scurried to get back up and didn't see where it went. "He still trusts me," I shouted back at her. I had no idea where the insolent tone of voice came from. I couldn't help it. Euphemia screeched in anger. She moved parallel to me and swung the sword toward me. I couldn't avoid it and gasped at the shock of the blade slicing into my upper arm. It wasn't deep, but blood ran down my elbow. I clutched it and backed up. Stumbled my way between shelves with tiny knickknacks on them. I grabbed several with no other purpose than to have more things to throw at her, and did just that. A hoarse cry of anger escaped her, anger at not having stopped a regular kin like me yet. I needed to put some distance between us, maybe figure out what I had in my hands and use it. This couldn't be it. According to the fire circle, we all had a few hours still. I was desperate to get as much time as I could. "No! Stop!" Euphemia shouted at me when I backed up more. I threw small bottles at her, empty ones because nothing happened. At least, not magically. She sustained a few cuts, but that was nothing to an armed kin. "Don't open that door, Emery," she added, and I realized I had the door of the connecting room at my back. The Gothia chambers consisted of 2 chambers. However, doing what she said meant allowing her to reach me with her murderous disposition and sharp blade. "Nope." I shifted the bottles to the crook of my left arm and reached behind me and opened the door, backing into the room. I was at once aware that there was no clutter from things being stored in here. I didn't crash into anything. Euphemia followed me and I backed up fast, passing a pedestal on my right. I glanced over at it and saw something small and black placed on the top there. From it, magic flowed, and it took on a grayish-beige shimmer here with all the building stones as its backdrop. "The shield?" I uttered and remembered the woman trying to kill me. I threw everything I had. She was good, though. She even deflected some glasses and glass bottles with her sword. Glass shards flew everywhere. "No!" I gasped when I felt the wall opposite the door against my back. I prepared to run left when a hiss broke out. I stopped and saw yellowish smoke rise from Euphemia's chest. She looked utterly surprised, her blue eyes wide as she stared at, not me, merely straight ahead. She'd frozen. A stunner potion? I'd heard of them, but never seen one in action before. If it was, though, it wouldn't last long. Feeling like I stepped out of myself, I did something I'd only ever seen in movies Earthside. I ran toward her, got past her sword, and grabbed her outstretched sword hand by the wrist. I swung in and raised my elbow, cracking it against her lower face. "Ugh! Crap!" I shouted at the pain that ran up my arm, but Euphemia stumbled back, not entirely subdued by the potion. She crashed into the pedestal and they both fell over. "No!" I screamed. That was the only thing keeping the citizens of Atlantis from storming the pyramid. I ran over and heard Euphemia moan, noticed the small twitches to her arms and legs where she lay in a heap over the pedestal. That was the moment I remembered that I was, in fact, armed too. Yeah, That's the kind of sound thinking one got when refusing to teach eager kin members to fight. I drew one of my daggers and shifted my grip on it. I clobbered Euphemia over the ear as hard as I could. She kicked out in a last, desperate attempt to stop me, but tripped me too late. I stumbled awkwardly over her, lost my dagger on the floor, and barely managed not to fall completely on her. That might have broken her back where she lay over the pedestal. "Oh, wow," I whispered and tried staying my breathing. I looked down. Euphemia was unconscious. I backed off and then remembered the shield, but the room was still covered in that eerie, grayish beige light. Sure enough, when I reached the other side, I saw a long crystal, charcoal black, sitting inside a black container that was shaped like a perfect oval, cut off at the middle. It had fallen from the pedestal and out of its plinth, but the shield held. I sank back on the floor and breathed a sigh of relief. Then I remembered Rye. I got to my feet, staggered a bit, and then hurried back to the other room. I immediately felt a familiar tug back into the room I came from, my dagger on the floor calling for me. But that could wait. I needed to deal with Euphemia too, but I estimated I had at the very least a few minutes. That meant I needed to help Rye as fast as possible. "Rye!" I shouted when I re-entered the storage room. "Where are you?" Some heavy-looking tapestries shook and began shifting a bit atop some furniture. "I'm here," the boy said, a second before his head popped out from his hiding place. I sighed deeply at the sight of him and stopped, hands on my thighs for a moment. "I'm glad you're all right," I told him. "She's not dead," he said, and came out from under the mess. "No," I admitted. "Then you need to be careful." "I know." I nodded vigorously. "Ready to get out of here?" He nodded too and walked over to the large mirror. There he put his hand on the surface, the reflection of it connecting with his flesh and blood version. Rye closed his eyes and concentrated. I saw a frown appear like he wasn't quite sure what to do, or how to do it. He was just a boy. Maybe not all magic was intuitive. Spells certainly weren't. I kept glancing between the doors we'd used so far, worried that someone else would come upon us. But finally, after a couple of minutes, a swirl of colors began floating out from Rye's little hand. It was silver and green, reminiscent of the actual shimmer, but weaker. When it filled the entire mirror, I thought I saw faint figures in there. People? Rye let go and looked back at me. "Do you want to come?" I drew a deep breath. "I really do," I admitted. The thought of the angered crowd out there was not something that was tempting to meet. The pull of my missing dagger intensified like it thought I would leave it further. I exhaled and shook my head. "I really do," I repeated, "but I think it's only right that I stay and face whatever comes our way." Rye nodded. "You should listen to that thought," the boy said, sounding much older than his young age. "It will help you more than you think, and you'll see." "See what?" "They're not evil." He had to be talking about every non-kin in Atlantis. I mustered a smile at him, maybe a little sadder than intended. Then the kid said, "Thank you," and simply stepped inside the mirror before the swirls of light vanished behind him, leaving nothing but the reflective surface of the mirror behind. I blinked and shook my head. What in the realms had I done? Chapter 6. Standing in the Gothia chambers surrounded by magical artifacts, clutching at the wound in my arm, I knew that even if the kin made it through the oncoming night, I would not. Maybe if I hadn't been seen. But I had. Euphemia had heard everything, and then seen me with an obviously magically gifted boy. He'd attacked her, and I'd attacked her by throwing magical artifacts at her. There was no way out of this regardless of the outcome with the mob of Lanteans outside the pyramid. A treacherous thought had me reaching for my remaining dagger. It could all go away if I finished off Euphemia. Simply slice through her throat and she would never speak again. It would only take half a minute. Simple as that. I sighed. No, it wasn't simple. Just a hope born out of desperation. That we would survive the city's impending attack and I could go on with my life. Maybe illustrious guide hadn't meant what he said about the beloved 10. Maybe it was all something I didn't understand. That he would explain, and everything would be all right again. But no. I turned and walked back into the shield room, feeling the tug of my missing dagger. It was always like that if I moved too far away from either of them. They were connected to me, and that had been through magic, too. I shook my head. So much magic. Were we not here to end all that? Had we not ended all use of magic in the city? Sure, some opposed the kin, but it had to be done in secret. No one had gained power during the last 6 years merely because they could threaten someone by waving their hands and have pretty lights and flames appear. It made me wonder if I'd been hearing things upstairs in that air duct. And still no, I had not misheard. Those words had been screamed in pure, honest anger. The fire circle was using magic to fight magic, and the deaths of the unfortunate beloved 10 had been because of the reckless behavior of the armed kin. At least one child was safe from the kin now. I didn't even want to think of what illustrious guide and the fire circle would have done to Rai had they known about his abilities. I neared the door to the shield room and forced myself to focus. I couldn't cut Euphemia's throat any more than I could fly. It wasn't right. Hell, 2 hours ago, I would have run to fetch the nearest guard and tell on someone like me had I come across the same scene that she had. I would have to find something to tie her up with. Hopefully, I could keep her quiet and out of the way for a while at least. But as I stepped through the door and raised my gaze, it became clear that Euphemia was not my most immediate problem. She still lay unconscious, legs on the floor, upper body over the fallen pedestal, but above that hung a thief, suspended from the ceiling. I let go of the wound in my arm. It stung at the motion, but I didn't care. There was an actual cat burglar in the room, hanging right above the pedestal, reaching out for the black crystal. He, for it was a he judging from build, was entirely dressed in black, which included a ski mask. It completely covered his head, except for the 2 eye holes and the one for his mouth. He wore a light harness on his upper body, which was fastened to the rope coming down from the ceiling. It looked like a scene from an Earthside movie. Where in the realms had he come from? I glanced up and saw the square hole there. So, he'd used the air ducts too then. That was the benefit of the stone building, of course. I shook my head. This was not important right now. What was important was the fact that he was reaching for the crystal. I didn't know too much about magic, but I was fairly certain that if that crystal was removed from the oval base, then the shield would go down, and that would be it. The only reason he hadn't gotten it yet was because Euphemia had toppled the pedestal over when she fell. "Hey!" I shouted at him. He startled. That much was clear by the jerk of his body at the sound of my voice. He had not expected me. How long had he watched before coming down like this? "Hello yourself," he said, and then tried reaching for the crystal again. 2 things struck me then. 1, he didn't want to detach from the rope so he could rely on a quick retreat up to the ceiling and the air duct. 2, what thief said hello when caught red-handed? "What are you doing?" I asked. I was too stunned to think of what to do. He wasn't armed, at least not visibly, and I deemed it unlikely that he was hiding anything other than a knife or such like on his person. Firearms had never taken off in Atlantis because of being forbidden centuries ago. They were too effective against magic. "Well," the thief said, making the rope swing just a little so he could reach the crystal. "I am stealing this shield lock to take down the protective spell the anti-magic cult has set up. How about you?" "How about me?" I repeated like an idiot. I stared at the crystal and how close his hand was. If he took it, then all hell would break loose. I couldn't let that happen, no matter how chatty this guy was. "No," I mumbled. "Huh?" "No!" I shouted and ran forward, throwing every caution to the wind. I had no clue what I was doing, but I had to stop him. It might be too late to save myself from being banished from the kin once Euphemia opened her mouth, but I couldn't let this thief help the mob outside. Everyone I knew and cared about was inside. "Hey, what?" he blurted when he noticed me reacting with more than words, but I knocked the breath out of him when I jumped up and onto his back. I grasped for the rope and held on for dear life when we both swung away from the pedestal. I heard an oomph from the man, followed by an outcry of shock. "What are you doing?" "Stopping you." "Get off me!" "No!" I shouted back, already wishing I could do so. The rope creaked under our combined weights, and the man twisted to get rid of me. The pedestal passed by under us again as we swung back and forth like a pendulum. This would not help. Sooner or later we'd stop, and then he could try to reach the crystal again. With no other solution popping up in my inexperienced fighter's head, I wound my left arm around the taut rope, tried to ignore the wriggling man under me, and got to cutting it. My daggers were deadly sharp and never needed to be honed, but the unsteady circumstances of this cutting job meant we swung over the pedestal twice more before I managed to cut through. Our trajectory was already toward the door leading out to the storage chamber. The taut rope snapped, and we fell hard to the floor. I swore I could hear the whoosh of air being forced out of the thief's lungs when he landed on the stone tiles with me on his back. "Are you crazy?" the thief wheezed under me. I tried punching him in the side, but only hurt my fist more than him. I gasped in pain and moved forward, pressing my shoulder and elbow between his shoulders, trying to push him down. "I am so tired of you people calling us crazy," I snarled at him. My weight bearing down on his upper body pushed him down to the floor again. I knew it wouldn't last, though. The man was stronger than me, probably a lot better at this, too. Why had illustrious guide never allowed me to learn how to defend myself? I grabbed for the thief's ski mask at the neck and tried yanking it off, but he reached back, fighting me. "What are you doing?" "Trying to see your stupid face." I saw nothing but wavy blonde hair before he pulled the mask back down. Then he seemed to get his bearings back somewhat. He rolled over on his side, and I dug my knees into his sides and clung around his neck, growling in anger like some ferocious monkey. I tried the mask again, the face side this time. He seemed adamant he should be protected by the thing because he forgot whatever maneuver he'd started and pulled the mask in the opposite direction. All I could discern was a short, cropped blonde beard and the blue eyes I could see through the eye holes. "Will you let go?" he said, no vitriol in his voice. "No!" "I was hoping to spend some time with a lovely lady today, but not like this," he said, and twisted his left arm under mine and pushed it away. I had no choice but to let go of the mask. The hole for his mouth ended up on his cheek. I had no idea I'd meet a female spider monkey instead. "I will not let you take that crystal," I snarled, barely reflecting on his comment. Spider monkey? Was he an Earthsider? Or had he at least spent some time there? And why did I even care? "Of course you won't," he said and tipped over on his back some more, effectively pinning me between him and the floor. "But I'm going to take it anyway." Realizing I was at a disadvantage and placed perfectly for an elbow in my face, I grabbed onto his left arm like I had his neck and head. "What in the hells are you doing?" he asked, and I could hear laughter in his voice now. We had to look like kindergartners rolling around on the playground. "I'm beating you," I told the thief with confidence I didn't know where came from. "With what?" He laughed outright now, an almost contagious sound. I snarled at him and thought of my dagger. Where was it? One was on the other side of the room, still calling for me. The other was closer since I didn't sense it all that well. The other side of the man, of course. I needed it to stop him. Maybe I could keep him at bay and shout for help. Or maybe Euphemia could bloody well wake up and assist me. She might hate me now, but here we had a common goal. Save the pyramid. Save the kin. I wriggled desperately to get free from under him and scurried over him, still holding onto his left arm, which was now twisted under me. There, right next to his knees. That was where my dagger lay. Why hadn't the idiot taken it? He surely could have. Was he that sure of himself? Or that sure of my ineptitude for fighting? The thought angered me, mostly because I'd been denied the chance to learn. I'd just never allowed myself to truly feel it before. I reached out for it, but the thief used that moment to twist back up on his side, effectively unbalancing me. I fell forward, landing on my side on the floor, right hip on top of him. "Spider monkey aside," the thief commented, trying to prevent me from kicking him in the head by pushing my right leg away. "I don't mind the view." I snatched the dagger and glanced back at him over my shoulder. My ass was more or less right in his face. I twisted inelegantly so said ass landed on the floor next to his chest before I forced my upper body up and lunged for him with the dagger. And boy was he fast then. He threw his arms forward, one hand catching my wrist, the forearm of the other slamming into my own, deflecting my intended blow to the right. I cried out in shocked anger more than pain. He didn't let go of my wrist, and I simply acted on instinct, not wishing to be held fast like this. That meant he had all the control, which, let's face it, he did. I scrambled forward and ended up straddling his chest way too easily, and realized he was letting me. He was having fun, taunting me. Had any armed kin seen this, they would have laughed so hard if not for the seriousness of the situation. All our safety was at stake here. I didn't let go of the dagger. Instead, I pushed down with all my might, the blade aimed at his chest. "What's this?" the thief asked. "I'm trying to kill you, you turd." His blue eyes crinkled with mirth behind the mask. "You're not very good at it." "Shut up!" I wheezed at him, trying so hard to stop him. It was easy for him to keep my hands and the dagger under control. Those meager 20 centimeters down to his chest might as well have been a mile. He was stronger than me. Why didn't he just push me off to the side? Better yet, why didn't I? With him gripping my wrists to avoid the dagger plunged into his heart, he was pushing right back at me. So, I forced my hands sideways, to the right. The unexpected move caught him off guard when I toppled forward, slightly to the right. My head smacked into his, the muffled cry of surprise or pain too close for comfort. A point above my left eye smarted, and I wanted to curl up, but knew instinctively to get away. I heard the thief grunt when I put my knee somewhere on his stomach, scurrying to get off him. I went a few meters on my hands and knees, dagger still in hand, before I turned and tried assessing the situation. I waved the dagger in front of me, but the thief was still on the floor behind me, hand to his face. Good. I'd caused him some pain then. His eyes caught mine, and I could see him moving his jaw tentatively behind the mask. Slowly, like he didn't want to scare me into doing something rash, he lifted his hands and adjusted the ski mask so his mouth became visible again. Then he eyed the toppled-over pedestal. Neither of us could see the crystal from here, but it was there, because the shield was still up, casting its eerie light over the entire room. His gaze returned to me, and I glanced over at Euphemia. Why wasn't she waking up? I needed her to. Had the thief used poison or a gas to render her immobile when he came down from the ceiling? He'd been playing with me so far. I needed help from someone. Anyone. My eyes darted to the door before I could think. "You don't want to do that," the thief warned. Well, when he put it like that, I absolutely wanted to do it. With my hand clenched around the hilt of my dagger, I scampered to my feet, heard him do the same, and bolted for the door. Chapter 7. "Stop!" the thief shouted after me. Yeah, right. I ran through the open door and into the storage room, and immediately realized the piles and stacks of magical artifacts were everywhere and in my way. I had to run straight ahead and then follow the pathway between the hoarded goods to take a sharp left to reach the door. It had not seemed so far when I entered with Rye earlier. I heard the man's steps behind me, and it spurred me on. I grabbed something from a nearby table and hurled it back over my shoulder. An explosion of smoke erupted. The thief shouted in surprise, but I did not. My own surprise rendered any noise firmly stuck in my throat. I kept on running through the large chamber and past the mirror Rye had left through. If the thief was following me, it was because he now deemed me a proper threat. He had to need just enough time to slip out without anyone being alerted to his presence. It might only be a matter of minutes, but I guessed that could be a long time for a skilled thief. And he had to have broken in here today of all days. There was a damned magical shield preventing people from entering the premises for crying out loud. How had he even gotten past that? Things crashed to the floor somewhere to my left, and I dared a glance behind me. He wasn't there. I stopped and stared. More stuff clattered to the floor, and furniture toppled over. There, on the other side of the large chamber. He was running left and then right to reach the opposite wall and the door before me. "No!" I mumbled and got to running again. He was so fast. He had to be with such a dubious career choice. I legged it and had nothing but the last door on my mind. Reach it, get through, and shout for help. I could only hope an armed kin or two were nearby. 3 meters left, and the thief leaped forward from behind a huge stack of books atop a chair and a ladder that had been pushed together. I skidded to a stop when the man reached the door first. He flashed me a smile, and I stepped back, keeping my dagger raised between us. "Sorry," he said, sounding like he wasn't sorry at all. "But I can't have you running off and alerting people." "Screw you." Intriguing proposition, but I don't think we have time for that. I lowered my eyebrows in confusion. What? The kin weren't well versed in complicated human interactions. We agreed on everything, so subtext wasn't all that necessary. If someone fancied someone, they would still talk about the teachings of illustrious guide while spending more time together. The thought made me realize we might not all know each other as well as we thought. I shook my head both at the thief's comment and my treacherous mind. Thinking these thoughts was difficult and dangerous. "Get out of my way!" I shouted at the thief. "Oh, we both know that won't happen. I have a job to do." "Job?" I sputtered. "You're a thief, and even if you did belong to the Thieves' Guild, it still wouldn't be a job." Not all of them belonged to that guild, but regardless, they all stole for a living. "I don't think you're in a good position to trample on other people's life choices right now," he pointed out. Standing in front of me, blocking the door, he looked relaxed enough, but I knew better. He was ready to pounce should I try something. His eyes were on mine, but I had no doubt the dagger in my hand was under close scrutiny too. "You don't know what you're talking about," I said automatically. I'd been trained to do so for many years. If anyone opposed us, or more importantly, illustrious guide, we'd tell them they were ignorant and leave the situation. People's words were poison to a true kin. They didn't know what they were talking about because they refused to listen to the words of truth. Magic was an infestation of evil, a tool to suppress humankind by a select few. It wasn't right. It needed to be gone. "I know that my life choices haven't riled up a mob of Lantians desperate for justice," the thief went on. He didn't seem to be in a hurry now. It seemed that as long as no kin members who were more threatening than me arrived, he had whatever time he needed. "That is not what's happening," I began. "It's just a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding? 10 dead children? Tell that to their parents." I pressed my lips together and narrowed my eyes while glaring at him. For once, I couldn't tell a non-kin they were wrong, because after hearing Illustrious Guide earlier, I knew he was right. "See? It's hard when your cult doesn't stand up to scrutiny, isn't it?" "It's not a cult," I said, raising my voice in anger. "Stop calling us that." "Okay," the thief said, and raised his hands a little, palms toward me in a placating gesture. I'd taken a step forward, waving my dagger about. "What do you think a cult is, then?" "Cults are crazy people with no freedom following certifiably insane leaders." "Oh, well, my bad," he said and lowered his arms. "I'm sure you're free to walk out of the pyramid then, through the front door and out that gate." My hand hurt from holding the hilt of my dagger so hard. I might have been trying to stop the thief back in the shield room, but now I truly wanted to thrust it into his head, repeatedly. I had no answers for this, except for the obvious ones. Of course I was free to do as I pleased, but I hadn't been allowed to help an innocent boy escape to safety. "I can't walk out the gate," I said when a thought struck me, "because there is nothing but people there waiting to tear me to shreds." I almost sounded triumphant, having found a flaw in his argument. "Illustrious guide would never do that to us." "So there," I added in my head. "Wow. You really do call him that," the thief responded to that. And then, "It's sad you believe that about fellow Lantians." Belief? What did belief have to do with anything? I knew. Simple as that. Arguing with this guy was futile. And painful. I didn't like not being able to answer properly. Where were all the words I'd been taught to fire back at people like him? And why was I talking to him anyway? He was here to destroy us. I had no doubt of that. Why was he making so light of our safety? Our lives? "There is a way out of this, you know," he went on, and then I knew. I drew in a sharp breath and stepped back. "All you have to do is pretend not to see anything, and in a matter of a few hours, it will all be over." He was trying to manipulate me, get me on board with taking down the shield. That would be our deaths, and he wanted me to watch silently while he doomed us? What a conniving asshole. I glanced over my shoulder. I wasn't getting out through the door he now guarded, but I would not stand by and do nothing either. The door to the shield room. It stood open, practically waiting for me. Without another word to the scheming thief, I turned and ran back the way I'd come. If I couldn't get out of the Gothia chambers, then he sure wasn't going to get inside the shield room again. All I needed to do was barricade it somehow. "Hey!" he shouted after me. With all the yells and magical explosions, I was beginning to think the Gothia chambers were soundproof. Surely someone would have heard us by now if not. No help arrived, though. I was on my own. Except for the guy chasing me. He chose the same route as me this time. I could hear his boots hitting the floor. But I had a few meters on him. If only I could reach the door. I felt something snag at my hair. Seriously? He was going to stop me by pulling my hair? I grabbed the first thing nearby I could, and instead of following my plan of reaching the door, I swung around and threw it. The abrupt motion surprised him enough for me to hit a bullseye. A dusty, leather-bound book struck his head and he reeled to no avail, falling sideways into stacks of magical items. "Ha!" I blurted at the sight, full of schadenfreude. I was grinning at the sight of the athletic thief, trying to gain his bearings while all kinds of stuff fell around him and on him. "You threw a book at me?" he managed while trying to get out of the chaos. He sounded like he couldn't believe he'd been struck down by something so simple. "Of course I did," I said. I wasn't too bad at games such as darts and the like. I had naturally good aim, but I'd never done anything like this. An abrupt laugh escaped me. "Wait," he said when I was about to run. I halted and turned back to face him. He'd settled now, remained in a half-seated, half-lying position among all the magical crap. Oddly enough, he hadn't been turned into a toad or slug or something equally gross. He needed to get up to catch me, though, and I was too close to the door now for him to be able to do so fast enough. "I don't get it," he said. "Get what?" "I saw you fighting that other kinswoman." He tilted his head sideways, and 2 tiny, bottled potions made clinking sounds where they fell beside him. There was a beige tint to their contents. The thief's eyes widened at the sight, and he audibly drew a breath of relief when they both landed next to his elbow without breaking. "The blonde," he added as if he had not been interrupted. "So? Things can't be all that good in here if you're fighting each other." "Who said things were bad?" "Well, if they're not, then the only bad things in here are her. Or you." I huffed at that. What was with this guy? He was getting on my nerves, and for some reason, I was letting him. I did not want to hear his nonsense, his lies. Did I? "You don't know what you're talking about." "You already said that." "That's because it's true." "Oh, so the reasoning you're going with is because?" "Don't do that." "Do what?" Somehow, with a ski mask on, he pulled off looking innocent. "Indirectly call us children. We know what we're doing." "I doubt that," he muttered. "Listen, I saw you help that boy." I frowned and glanced back in through the door to the shield room. He could be telling the truth. I didn't remember how the door had been positioned, but he could have had a direct view of Rye going through the mirror. But so what? "What's it to you?" I asked. "Is that why she was trying to kill you? Because you helped that boy escape?" "Doesn't matter," I said, deflecting because I didn't know what he had up his sleeve. Was this another attempt to twist things around in my mind? I'd had enough of reality-altering truths from Illustrious Guide today. "Of course it matters." "No, because no matter what we do, you twist it and make it into something bad. We can never catch a break." "That's what you think?" He appeared genuinely puzzled. His eyes, at least. They were bright and blue, friendly-looking. I didn't think this guy was willing to kill me, but he was willing to stop me so he could steal the crystal. That made him dangerous and untrustworthy. You're sort of right, but I saw you fight for that kid, in your, unique way of fighting." He smirked at that, and I glowered at him. "Which means," he went on before I could say something mean, "that at least there's someone in here who isn't bad." I narrowed my eyes. "What?" he asked. "I'm waiting for whatever bullcrap you have planned to follow that's sucking up, so you can manipulate me into helping you." "Ah," he said and laughed. "Manipulate you? Why would I do that when I can use magic?" For a second, I didn't catch on. Then the thief snatched one of the bottled potions next to his arm and threw it at me. I backed up and tried turning to run for the door, but the tiny bulbous bottle hit my left arm, and the thin glass fractured at once. Something popped out of it and expanded. I was still running, but didn't get more than a step before something huge and claw-like expanded, and then caught hold of me and engulfed my body. My crash to the floor was not elegant. Chapter 8. "Back off, perv!" I yelled, twisting desperately at the binds that held my body trapped like a tipped-over pole on the floor. "Perv? I haven't even touched you." I could hear his steps coming closer. "And to be fair," he went on, "you were the one climbing all over me when I was trying to commit an honest theft." "Honest? Besides, I wasn't climbing all over you. I was fighting you." Oh, was that what that was? I must have gotten confused. "Screw you!" "Hey, I didn't say it wasn't interesting." He stopped next to me, and by craning my neck I could see him smiling above me. "Go eat a stranger's toenail," I snarled, going for a more Lantian type of insult. I peered down at myself. I was covered from my shoulders to my toes in a gooey, beige web that held me tight. It reminded me of the pattern of a cobweb, but the substance was wax-like. I wriggled desperately and twisted over on my back. "Get me out of this," I said to the thief. "It's choking me," I added, hoping to trick him into helping me out of some deeply buried kindness. "No, it's not. The spell is meant to trap you, not kill you. So much for hidden kindness. If he had any at all, it was buried deep with piles of stolen goods on top. The thief took a step past me, toward the shield room, but then he stopped and stepped back.
"You're wrong, you know."
"I'm never wrong," I told him, twisting desperately, but the waxy binds didn't budge. I did still have my dagger in my hand, though. When lying on my back, he couldn't see it, halfway under my thigh. Surely it could break the spell if only I could shift the angle of the blade and cut through it, and hopefully not into my leg instead. The blade was deadly sharp.
"I bet you aren't," the thief said and laughed. "But you are about this. The mob isn't out there to tear you all limb from limb."
"They sure tried killing me earlier today." I saw him blink at that, but couldn't discern any other facial reactions. I didn't know where he'd been when the angered mob had fired their spears at me, but he hadn't seen that judging by his reaction.
"There are children in here," he said.
"Yeah, and illustrious guide says the mob wants all our heads for the 10 who lost their lives. Is that fair, do you think?" "No, because only a select few readies are guilty of that crime, your illustrious guide among them. The mob is here to gain their freedom." "They are free," I insisted. Illustrious guide said so. Everyone had been allowed to live their lives normally after the Red Kin took power. The thief shook his head.
"You forget everyone out there with magical abilities or magical ancestry."
"They are free to live here too. They only have to refrain from using magic."
"That would be like you being free to live here if you stopped having red hair," he argued.
"They have to hide. Don't any of you know this?" "They do not," I protested, while carefully twisting the dagger so the blade's edge faced the gooey binds. "Do they?" I added and stopped moving. He sounded so sure. Did he know someone like that? Was he one? He sure had known what potion he'd trapped me with, but that might also just be because he was a thief and magical artifacts were valuable. Breaking into the pyramid while it was under siege and protected by a magical barrier told me this wasn't his first job.
"They do,"
the thief confirmed. "The armed kin are dangerous. They hunt anyone who steps out of line." I huffed. My initial thought was that he was trying to trick me, but I was getting confused. He didn't need to stick around here telling me this. Unless he was a psycho, which was not my impression. Annoying? Yes. In my way. That too. But not cruel. And if he was telling the truth, maybe I should be glad I had never been allowed to join the armed kin. I didn't want to hunt people in their homes. I didn't want to hunt down people like that at all. That wasn't what I'd been told the armed kin were about. "Stop saying these things!" I yelled at the man.
"Sorry,"
he said, and then seemed to make up his mind as he looked to the door to the shield room.
"It's only the truth."
He stepped forward, but I pressed the blade of my dagger away from my thigh and into the wax web. That was all it took. The moment the blade sliced through a thread, the whole web vanished, retracting into itself and leaving no trace on my clothes. I rolled around and swung the dagger after the thief. The tip sliced into his leg, a shallow cut. But he hadn't expected it, and he hissed at the sudden sting. The surprise slowed him down a millisecond, which was all I needed to reach for his ankle and yank it back toward me. He must have been so sure I was trapped. Now, he fell face first, waving his arms to prevent it, but to no avail. I rolled to the right to avoid being crushed under him and got to my feet. I heard the thief cursing behind me, but I ran forward, avoiding the same treatment as him. This time, I did reach the door. "Hey, wait!" he shouted after me, but I ran through, spun as I skidded on the tiles, and slammed the door shut. "Yes!" I hissed in triumph, and then realized the door swung into the shield room. I had no key, and the thief would have no problem pushing his way inside. Damn! I glanced around in desperation, but there was nothing in there except Euphemia on the floor and the toppled-over pedestal. Okay then, the pedestal it was. I ran for it, pushed Euphemia so she rolled off with a sigh, and then dragged the pedestal back toward the door. I put one end so the edge stood in the grout between a couple of floor tiles, and the other so it fell against the door. A second before a loud bang sounded from outside, I sat on the slanting side of the pedestal, forcing it to remain put. Good grief. Had the man run straight at the door and crashed into it? I could hear muffled words from out there, probably swearing. He came at it again. The collision on the other side of the door sent reverberations through the pedestal, and I planted my feet solidly on the floor, hoping it wouldn't slide and fall. There would be no stopping the guy then. Where was the armed kin when you needed them? I shook my head at the thought and tried not to think about what the thief had told me about them. I couldn't believe it was true. I knew many of them. Were they truly such monsters outside these walls? A groan caught my attention, and I saw Euphemia stir on the floor. Now she woke up? Maybe my pushing her off the pedestal had shaken her enough to come to. Another bang came, the pedestal shaking under me. "Please hold," I whispered. All I needed to do now was stave off the thief. If someone would just come by. He was trapped out there now, both his escape route and target in here with me. I only needed to keep him out. "What are you doing?" Euphemia said. She was awake now, looking worse for wear and angry to boot. Her blue eyes were narrowed, and she glowered at me. Was it too much to ask for her to have gotten a case of amnesia? "You traitor! You let that boy use magic." "Euphemia," I said, aware that I was now trapped between her and the thief. "It's not what it looks like anymore." She wasn't listening. Still on her knees, she crawled unsteadily toward her sword and picked it up. Then she turned her eyes to me again. She was so dazed I was sure I could have wrenched the weapon out of her hand, but I couldn't move. The thief made another attempt at the door, and it took all I had to remain on the pedestal, pushing it down so it could remain in place and keep the damn door shut. "Euphemia, listen!" I shouted, but she had decided. She was swaying on her feet, but she raised the sword and staggered toward me. For a moment, I froze. I wasn't used to armed people chasing me down and attacking me like this. When she swung the sword, I thrust my dagger up and swung it, deflecting the sword's blade. Euphemia and I both stared at the short blade I wielded. The mysterious alloy was strong, no doubt about it. Still, she would shake off her dizziness and surely cleave me in half with her sword in a second. "We are under attack!" I yelled at her. "We're on the same side!" "We are not on the same side, you traitor!" she yelled back in my face. I swore then and there if I got out of this alive, I was going to learn how to use my daggers properly so I could defend myself from people like this. What had illustrious guide been thinking, giving me such powerful weapons and forbidding me to be able to use them fully? The thief slammed into the door again. This time he must have felt outraged at it barely budging, for he pounded a fist into it too. "See?" I shouted at Euphemia. "He's after the crystal." I flicked my arm out, indicating the crystal which lay on the floor, still embedded in and sticking out of its oval-shaped container. Euphemia stepped back, not dazed enough to remain close enough for me to reach and attack her. "It still works," she said. "Yeah, as long as it remains in the container." At least I figured that was how it worked. But the thief outside the door thinks differently. She whirled around, facing me again, and she looked nauseous at the sudden movement. Had I given her a concussion when I hit her over the head? It had helped me then, but it wouldn't now. I needed her to help me stop the thief. "Thief?" she repeated. "What did you do?" I groaned in frustration. "I didn't do anything. He broke in here." I pointed brusquely at the severed rope that still hung from the air duct up in the ceiling. Euphemia seemed to deduce what she wanted to from that. "You were here, even though you're not supposed to." For crying out loud, Euphemia. I helped the boy, I admit that. But I don't want the shield to go down any more than you do. I've seen the crowds out there, waiting for us to fall, remember? You said you'd seen them too. They will decimate us. Her hatred of me was obvious in the dark look she sent me, but I could see the hesitation, too. She knew as well as I did what awaited us out there. "Give me a second and I will help," she said, and lowered her sword a fraction. She seemed pale and weakened. Her head had to be causing her a lot of pain. "Are there any other armed kin nearby? We need some help." She shook her head and then winced at the motion. "Just me. We're stretched thin as it is, with all the crazy people outside." "Oh, great. The thief." I stopped talking and eyed the door over my shoulder. Why wasn't he trying to force the door open anymore? Had he given up? That's strange. What is? He didn't seem the type to simply give up when he'd come this far, I said. Maybe he... The blast hit me like a shockwave, and I flew forward, thrown off the pedestal which scraped and screeched on the terracotta tiles, before it too shot along the floor. I landed hard on the other side of the room and cried out at the impact. I lost my grip on my dagger but forced myself to turn over on my other side before getting it. I needed to know what was going on. A little dazed, too, now, I eased up on my elbow and stared toward the door. It hung from one hinge, the other broken. Smoke wafted in from the storage room, but not so much that I couldn't see the thief. He stared at his work with a surprised smile on his face, at least judging by his widened eyes. He stood with an enormous book in one hand and an empty pouch in the other. Whatever he'd thrown at the door, together with a spell, had worked wonders for him. I wanted to scream. There had been a lot of magic to handle in a non-magical environment today. He dropped both things and ran toward the shield room and inside. "No!" I whispered and scampered to get up. Euphemia had not been knocked out either, but as she unsteadily got to her feet and raised her sword to attack the man, he easily dodged her blow and sent her falling with a quick elbow to her jaw. I stopped and ran back for my dagger, both of them when I saw the other one close by. The thief was quick and knew what he was doing. Too quick. I realized I'd never had a chance when he reached the crystal before me. I skidded to a halt and watched in stunned disbelief as he took hold of the container and lifted it. "No!" I screamed then. "Don't!" He glanced up at me and shrugged like there was nothing he could do about this. "It has to be done," he said, and pulled the oblong mineral from the container. A slight buzzing noise came when the light emanating from the shield retracted from the room. It didn't happen fast, merely elegantly like a soothing light show. "You just killed us all," I said, the disbelief of his action clear in my voice. The thief shook his head to this. Then he put the black crystal in a pocket in his harness, ran a few steps, and jumped. He grabbed the rope and climbed up. I couldn't have stopped him had I had the option. I was too far away, and the world had suddenly crashed around me. They would come now. All of them. It was only a matter of minutes before the shield would be fully down, allowing them inside. I stumbled toward the broken door, feeling much more broken myself. My body felt battered and worn out, and I breathed heavily, though that was from shock more than any injuries. I suppose that was the only reason why I didn't hear Euphemia as she ran forth and hit the back of my head, the blow pushing me forward, stumbling, unable to see her, let alone defend myself. Chapter 9. "Euphemia, stop!" I shouted. It came out more like an incoherent caw. I could hear her steps behind me, and the next blow sent bolts of white-hot pain through my back. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, and the second my lungs allowed air in, it burned. One more strike like this and she would knock me unconscious. I knew it. I let my body stumble forward, let the momentum of gravity drag me as far as it could, and then down. I rolled around, forcing my body to cooperate. I threw my hand to the side and took hold of the first thing I could, a rock of some kind. I threw it at the oncoming shadow that was Euphemia. She shrieked, terrified of the magical object she was surrounded by, no doubt. She twisted sideways and backed up, but the rock, a pink one, hit her stomach with little force and tumbled to the floor. More importantly, her backing off for a beat let me breathe and focus. "Stop it!" I shouted again. This time my voice held. "There's no point." "No point?" she repeated, her voice shrill and angered. She stopped moving then, her head likely still causing her pain and dizziness. The thief's elbow to her face hadn't helped. She looked both pale and flustered. She was favoring her left side and almost dragging her sword behind her. No wonder she hadn't skewered me with it. She didn't have the strength. "You killed us all!" she shouted at me and began walking closer. I started crawling backward. I didn't. It was the thief. The thief? And who let him inside? "I didn't," I protested. I tried to stop him." "Liar! I saw what you did!" she yelled and waved a limp hand toward the mirror behind me. "He was just a boy, Euphemia. Illustrious guide should—" "Don't you dare say what illustrious guides should and shouldn't do. I can't believe you'd even presume to know such things." "But he lied to us," I said, my voice hushed and emoting the despair I felt. He had said he would always tell us the truth, but he hadn't. He had lied. And he had lied about the lives of 10 innocent children. "He would never lie to us!" Euphemia raised her sword and ran forth. I scrambled to get back and drew my feet up right before the sword hit the floor, cracking the ancient tile under it. "You traitor!" she screamed in frustration, knowing full well that she was injured and slower than usual. She still had that sword, though, and the sharp blade was deadly in a slow hand, too. I backed up and got to my feet, never leaving her out of my sight. I didn't dare turn my back on her. I'd been lucky she'd used her fists so far, but one decent strike with that sword, and I was done for. All I could do was back up and in an inelegant feat get upright. Euphemia swung the sword in a blind rage, cracking floor tiles and crashing into magical artifacts stacked around us. Her initial fear of them seemed to have been overshadowed by her hatred for me. I stumbled backward, feeling no pain from her punches. Adrenaline coursed through my body. Survival instinct, a marvelous thing. How much would I have left after this day? Was it possible to run out? "You deserve to die!" Euphemia screamed when I ducked under her blow. There was hardly anything in this realm more important to me than knowing exactly where that sword was. But I paid attention to her, too. I'd never seen her so distressed, so furious. Like me, she knew what was happening out there now. There was no going back. I twisted sideways and clung to a heavy and sturdy dumbwaiter with fabrics and clothes on it that I had no idea what could do. The sword struck into it, right in front of my face. My eyes widened at the close call, and I jumped back, passing the large mirror. How I wished in that moment to go through it. Wherever it would send me couldn't be worse than this. A movement behind Euphemia caught my eye, and for the first time my gaze strayed from the sword. That was the moment she could have lopped my head off, but she was trained to fight, despite her clumsy concussion-like motions now. She instantly caught on to the threat behind her. The thief! He jogged into the artifact room for some reason, a focused look in his eyes. Euphemia whirled around, not quite steadily, deeming him the bigger threat. Rightly, too, but the lack of attention directed at me gave me the chance I'd been hoping for. I ran closer to her and stomped my foot down below her right knee. She went down on the other one at once. The thief sped up then and swung closer to the pile of stuff where he'd fallen earlier. He grabbed something. He caught my eye, and before I could react in any kind of way, he threw it to me. Not at me, but to me. I realized that quickly by his non-aggressive pitch. I stepped sideways and caught it, then backed up again, as Euphemia was on her way up, a hoarse roar of frustration escaping her. She swung back, ignoring the thief and all kinds of valid rules in fighting, I was sure. I felt the glass against my palm and realized what the thief had given me. Thankfully, it hadn't broken in my hand when I caught it. Now, I shifted my grip and hurled it at Euphemia's legs. She tried to stop it with her sword, but was too slow. The bottled and beige potion exploded out from the confines of the glass the second it shattered against her knee. The gooey web expanded so fast I hardly saw what happened until she stood there, right in front of me, like a cocoon from shoulder to her toes. Her sword, thankfully, was pressed alongside her leg and not a danger. It didn't have the magic nullifying ability of my daggers either. I exhaled, short and hard at the sight. Then, Euphemia began tipping over, straight for me. I leaped forward and caught her. She felt heavy, but I supported her. "Here!" the thief yelled and ran closer. I had no idea what he was up to. He looked like he'd forgotten we were on different sides here. "Magic?" Euphemia yelled, way too close to my ear. "Magic?" she repeated even louder. "I can't believe you, Em! You damn traitor!" Her voice broke on that last word. The thief reached the mirror only a couple of meters from me. He took something from his pocket, a small metal square of some kind. I noticed it had some symbols on the sides, but then the thief set it right on the mirror's surface, and the thing seemed to melt away. It floated out on the glass and spread, and when it did so, something came into view in the mirror's reflective surface. It was almost like when Rye had done it, only I could see little but trees in there. "Now!" the thief yelled and grabbed hold of Euphemia's shoulder. I didn't think it through. I simply pushed from the opposite side, helping maneuver her toward the mirror. At first, she couldn't see what was going on, but she caught on fast enough. "No! Emery, damn you! You're killing me!" Considering it had been more than okay with her half a minute ago to slaughter me, the double standard didn't win her any points. With a last heave, the thief and I pushed her into the mirror, and her scream was cut short as she disappeared. Then, the surface flashed, and the mirror looked normal again. I stared into it, seeing nothing but myself, dressed in red from top to toe, breathing hard and standing next to a thief in black, mask still covering most of his features. "What did we just do?" I said, incredulous. "Saved your life," the thief said. "It was her or you." "Will she be all right?" The thief shrugged. "Don't know. That didn't look like Atlantis, though, so she might have a hard time returning here." I sighed and stepped back, facing the real him and not his reflection. "Why did you do that?" "Do what?" "Help me." I glanced toward the opening to the shield room. He'd come back. He'd been on his way out now that his job was done. This made no sense. "To prove you wrong, of course." "Wrong?" He smiled. It might have been infectious if not for the gravity of my situation. For all our situation. "To let you know that not everyone out there is an enemy. You'd be surprised to find a lot of good people outside the Red Kin. People who help each other, even if they don't agree on everything." That was the exact opposite of what Illustrious Guide said. He'd always told us we needed to stay away from them, and if we couldn't, to at least not listen to them. "Look," the thief said, his voice softer. Maybe he could see the confusion on my face. I was too unsettled to hide it. "You helped that kid because he needed it." "Yes," I agreed. That was true. "I did the same for you. You didn't deserve to be killed for helping him. Trust me," he began, but I instantly snorted at that. "Trust me," he repeated, and suddenly glanced around. A noise intruded. It was the muffled roar from the mob outside. It was intensifying to the point of being perfectly audible, even in here. "We're not all bad out there." "Even a thief?" "Even thieves." His smile turned softer, too, but I couldn't reciprocate. "I have to leave," he said, and stepped back. I nodded. He did not want to be caught here now and be accused of fraternizing with us. "Thanks," I said, and turned, not looking back as I finally went for the door with no one blocking it or running after me with a sword. I closed the door carefully behind me and then, finally, heard the steps I'd been so desperate to hear mere minutes ago. Now they were here? I shook my head. The armed kin had seen the shield go down now. The increased noise from the mob meant exactly that. In a minute, maybe, it would retract into the ground, and they could finally run inside the premises and then into the pyramid proper. It was too late, though. There was no restoring the shield with the crystal gone. I wasn't even sure it could be done in time if we had it. Instead of pondering that thought, I ran the opposite way of the oncoming armed kin and left the Gothia chambers behind me. As I took the back stairs up, the crowd's shouts rose, the united voices of an entire city deafening even at this distance. They had broken through. I was sure of it. I pushed on and ran into the Atlas halls. Everything had changed now. The red kin stood huddled together throughout the space, no care for the prisoners anymore. They pressed against one of the back walls. Good. They shouldn't face the onslaught first. Hopefully the mob could see them for who they were, or, more importantly, who they weren't. Men, women, and children alike were crying in fear. Some cried out in desperation, but there was no one here to help them, especially not illustrious guide. I kept searching for him among the other kin, but he was nowhere to be seen. Had he remained in his apartments instead of standing with us in these last moments? Unbelievable. I pushed past several people until I reached the terrace door. The least I could do now was face the oncoming mob first. The people there made less of a fuss. They were more subdued. I stopped and heard they were reciting our affirmation, chanting it out, keeping themselves under control that way. A woman lifted her head then. Daria. She swayed a little, probably slightly more drunk than the last time I'd seen her, but there was something utterly sober about her eyes too now as she looked at me. The roar of the crowd grew and grew. They were running up the external stairs as well as the interior ones, likely overrunning frightened kin down there. I moved forward until I stood next to Daria, and she reached her hand out, breaking the link with someone else. I swallowed hard and joined in between them, feeling their firm hold of my hands. A small comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. We surrender our stubbornness to the wisdom and guidance of the brotherhood of the venerable red kin. They chanted around me, and I couldn't join in. The words wouldn't leave me. They tasted like ashes in my mouth. I glanced to the window in the terrace door and saw a shadow emerge, the crowds blocking the sun as they reached our level. It would all be up to them now, as they brought magic back with them. And I hoped, for the first time in my life, that illustrious guide, no, Kerwin Bowden, was wrong, and that a thief was right. The end. I hope you enjoyed Emery's illuminating and suspenseful adventure during the Red Kin's last few hours in the pyramid. This is, of course, only the end of one chapter of her life. The story continues in Malicious Magic, Book 1 of the Atlantis Outcasts, wherein Emery must continue living on her own terms, surrounded by lots of magic, old gods, and witches. This has been Return of Magic, an Atlantis Outcasts prequel, written by G.K. Lund, copyright 2021 by G.K. Lund, audiobook production copyright 2025 by G.K. Lund. If you want to be notified of other audiobooks by G.K. Lund, remember to click subscribe. That way you won't miss new additions to this YouTube catalog.